I'll just wait for a minute. There you go. We're just waiting for the funny Zoom lady to tell us she's recording. Welcome, everyone. Good morning. Lovely to have you with us. Yeah, when Amy and I booked this session, we were thinking, well, if we get to sort of 2025, we'll be doing really, really well. And we're at 42 this morning, so really good to have you all with us. The high numbers does mean that introductions are going to be kind of tricky and would take up the whole session. So what I am probably going to attempt to do in a few minutes is do breakout rooms and just do small groups for people just to say good morning to one another. And add a quick bit of discussion, and then we'll come back as a main group. So I'll do that in a few minutes. But first, yeah, really good. Yeah, great to have you all with us. This is part one of a two-parter. Okay, so this is our sort of introductory webinar, just a short hour session with you all this morning. And then in July, 13th of July, we've got a sort of a half-day training session, which you're welcome to book in on, and we'll give you the links and all the rest of it at some point this morning. So yeah, this is very much the introductory level section, and then if you can join us in July for the full training session, it would be really good to have you with us. And we are talking about putting on another one because the uptake for this morning has been so good. We're sort of thinking it feels like people are wanting to look more at this now, and how do we participate or get young people participating in the work that we run and the services that we deliver. And yeah, so it's quite exciting when you get this sort of uptake, because you think, yeah, people are actually really eager to get young people's voices heard. So we'll talk more about that as we go through this morning. But yeah, just a quick promotion for the July session, and we will lay on another one if we get fully booked. So it'd be really good if you can join us for the sort of full session. Just by way of introductions, obviously you know about Momentum and Amy's brilliant work there. So yeah, please do reach out to Momentum if you've got questions about the session, or you'd like us to follow up on anything. Please sort of channel that through Momentum, and we'll pick that up. Just on my side, just to give you a little background, I've been working now in the youth sector, and this is where you all say you don't look that old. I've been doing youth sector work for 20 years now, which I can't quite believe it's that long, but it actually is. In September this year, it'll be 20 years exactly since I took up my first sort of youth work job in the sector. So yes, it's quite a milestone. What have I learned during the 20 years? I've learned an awful lot, but what we're covering today is probably one of the most important things that I've learned actually from working in this sector. It's actually, the more we listen to young people, the more we talk directly with them about our services and our activities and everything we do with young people that's brilliant, the more we talk to young people about that, the better it gets. So there's a little bit of sort of, yeah, I guess reflection from me this morning. So what I'm going to do this morning, I'm just going to split you out into breakout groups, which will be a little bit chaotic for a minute, but we're just going to split out into groups, and just very quickly, and I mean very quickly, I'm being very strict about this, you'll be in groups of sort of, yeah, 5, 6 hopefully, and then what I'd like you to do is just literally say where you're from, sort of name where you're from, what your organisation does sort of day to day. So, you know, we support young people in this setting, or we do youth work or youth clubs in this setting. So just a really quick introduction, and then I'd like you to discuss just for 5, possibly 10 minutes. I'll go around the groups and see how we're getting on. This question is, why do young people's voices matter? Okay, so yeah, that's the question that I want you to spend just 5 minutes discussing. Why do young people's voices matter? And then what I'd like you to do, I'll then hit the timer, which will bring you all back into the big group. And I'd like you just to select a spokesperson who will just quickly feedback to say one quick point, why do young people's voices matter? Because, so just give us a sort of a very quick because. Then from that point on, that will sort of be us introduced to one another and working together. And then I'll just take you through some of the key aims and some thoughts from me. But I was just saying to the Momentum team, this 1 hour webinar is very tight, and I've tried my best not to compact a sort of 4-hour training session into 1 hour. So hopefully I've got the level of content right, but we'll see how we get on. So without further ado, let's go into breakout rooms. Quick introduction, so name, quick introduction of your organisation, and then I'd like you all to just discuss this question, this one question: why do young people's voices matter? Okay, so that's the key question. So I'm going to go for the breakout rooms now, and hopefully it will work pretty smoothly. Brilliant. Welcome back, everybody. Sorry that was very quick, but it was really good, really good. I was going through the different groups and I was eavesdropping and waiting for people to finish, and there were some fantastic points coming through, to the point where I think some of the people in here have been doing youth work for some time and have really got to grips with how we listen to young people and why it's so important. So there were some brilliant answers. Sarah in breakout room 4, she described my youth work career as being as long as forever, which I thought was a bit worrying.
Sorry, Simon.
And you also mentioned Greta Thunberg, which leads us nicely on to the video that I'm going to share in a minute. But very good. So I'm going to use that example in a second. But before then, let's just have a quick run through. So each group, we've got to keep this very timely and very tight. So apologies if I cut you off. It's just because we've got so many people. So if we could start with just breakout room 1 and your spokesperson, whoever you might be, just give us a very quick précis or the key points from your discussion around that question on why do young people's voices matter.
Okay, that was us on spokesperson.
Brilliant.
We said because we don't necessarily know what's relevant and what the young people want. They're more likely to engage in services if they've got their voices involved in it and have told us what they would like to do. It is all about the young people and we need to listen to them. It needs to be focused on them. They will feel more valued if they have input. At school, they have to do things, they're told what to do, where away from the school setting, when they can help decide and choose what we would put on for them, it helps them to find themselves and develop. And also funders now, a lot of funders are asking for how you include youth participation within your organisations. I think that was all we said.
Excellent, good, very good. Well done, group 1. Group 2.
Can I confess and say that I can't remember which group I was actually in? I know I'm a spokesperson, but I didn't look at the number room I was in.
Colin, I think we're group 2, Colin. I think.
I should have made you come up with team names. Well, let's do it this way. If you're a spokesperson, can you sort of wave at me and let me, jump in? Okay, so Ellie, if you go next, whichever group you were, and then I'll come to Colin, and then we'll have to wave again because I'm working with screens here.
Yeah, fine. So we talked about the importance of involving young people in terms of driving up engagement with services and how important that is, making sure that it's not a tokenistic thing. So, young people might get asked the same question a lot, but you need to make sure that when you're asking young people what they want, that actually that will have impact on the service you're developing. We talked about kind of not being patronizing. So, making sure that we're acknowledging that young people do have an awful amount of knowledge to share with us, and actually that they are best placed to tell us what their needs are. And we talked about those missing voices. So my organisation, we talked about the voices that often get missed, young people with kind of profound multiple learning disabilities or physical disabilities. We talked about also the kind of the voice of faith youth groups as well, or faith groups in general, that get missed. So we kind of had quite a wide ranging conversation. Yeah, that was us.
Excellent, well done, brilliant. Colin, thank you, Ellie.
So we spoke about how young people might not have a voice anywhere, whether at home, school, and so that's one of the reasons why it's important. They bring different perspectives and different energy and ideas to the room and to conversations, which if we listen to and learn from now, we will be able to provide better services for them now, not always thinking of the future. Let's give them what they want, when they want it, and how they want it to be delivered, through them designing services. And if we give them that, then the services will likely be better.
Excellent. Thank you, Colin. Really good point. So a couple of you have mentioned funders already. Now, for me, we don't do youth participation because we keep our funders happy with it. We do youth participation because we know it delivers better outcomes for young people. That's why we do it. It's an added bonus that if we do it and we do listen to young people's voices, the funders are much more interested in us as an organisation, and it's much more, we're a much more successful organisation as a result. But it's really important, and I do appreciate that youth work is dependent on funding, and we live in that world. But yeah, for me, that youth participation is the right thing to do. It's the best thing to do, and it's an added bonus that funders like it. But on the flip side, the reason that funders want to do that now is that they don't want to be funding projects that aren't led by young people and aren't delivering the best outcomes for young people. So think of it in those terms. Some people say, oh, I've got to do youth participation to get this funding. What a faff. But from the funders' point of view, they want their money to go as far as possible and deliver the best for those young people. And that's why they do it. So I'll step down off the funding horse temporarily, but we'll come back to that. It's important. Okay, so we've done 3 groups. I've got 3 more to go. Sarah?
Yep.
Yeah. Sarah and Emma, and then we'll have one more after that.
Okay, I think one of the things we all agreed on was that young people are our future. And I think that's really critical that we remember they're going to be the ones in the future who are doing everything. They have lived experience, so therefore they know what they want, they know what they need, and they probably know how it should be delivered. The police felt that if they have young people's views, they can help them, which is really, a really important thing. So they may join a group, and actually that influence will support them to move on and change their lives. Without somebody who worked within an intervention team felt that without participation, it wouldn't work. So, that's really, really crucial. Young people's voices are important because we hear from people with influence and who are older. So most of those people who are, going back to yours, Simon, about funding, they're the people who make the choices. And actually, we need young people who, I know in Norfolk we do have young people commissioning services, but maybe more young people who are influencing those people, and for those people to sit side by side a little bit more. And young people feel validated if they're listened to, and that really helps. And if we show respect, they will be better influencers as well. And yeah, that's kind of where we came from.
Excellent. Really like that. That's another really key point, and I really like that around when we do youth participation, it helps young people's confidence and self-esteem improve in part of that process, because they feel, okay, actually that individual or that organisation, they want to hear what I've got to say about how I feel and what I experience as a young person. Absolutely brilliant. So thank you for that. Really good. Emma.
Yeah. So we talked about, again, it's young people telling us what they need. So whether that's, we need to be able to provide the right service for young people. And yes, that includes steering groups and funding as well. But yeah, we need their voice to know what services to actually create. Again, we've got building their confidence, self-esteem, to feel valued and to give them respect as you would anyone else. To form an idea of what it's like to be a young person now, to get that alternative perspective from a different social group than I might be part of or anyone else. We've got, from a safeguarding point of view, it's really important to listen to young people's voices in order to keep them safe. And I think one of the biggest things that we took from it was it's breaking down barriers.
Excellent. Really good. Thank you. Well done. Group. I've forgotten which group you're in, but well done.
5.
5. Fantastic. Okay, so I've had 5. I'm missing 2 more spokespeople. Who's out there? Amy, are you one? And Jade, are you one? Fantastic. Amy and then Jade. And then
we'll, I drew the short straw because I think they decided I'd already spoken in the big meeting, so I could do it. So yeah, we got a lot of the same points that other groups said, so I'm not going to go over them again, but just that point about making sure young people feel valued and that what they want is reflected in the projects that they're taking part in. And there was one that we got that hasn't been said yet, and that was that young people can get frustrated if they're not listened to, and that actually you might see that frustration coming out in negative behaviours and things like that. So actually, if you want your group to kind of run well and effectively, then youth voice is quite critical to that as well.
Excellent. Thank you, Amy. And Jade.
Hello. So we mainly focused as well, which has already been talked about how young people are shaping our future. So it's really important to be listening from as early on and make sure that they know that their voice matters, so that as they go into adulthood and as they get older, they're not afraid to share their opinions and share their thoughts. We talked again about how we hear the voice of young people that are unable to communicate verbally, and how we need to get creative with that. And some people talked about creating different spaces instead of it. We had a lot of counselling sort of in our group, and rather than having it an environment where you sat face to face, getting outside and doing different things, and yeah, just getting creative with our young people, really.
Excellent, brilliant, well done everybody, that's fantastic, and you've done really well. Sorry it was a bit chaotic, but it's been really good. So Sarah mentioned Greta Thunberg, and I was going to show a video clip, but I'm going to sort of move us on from that, actually, just to keep up the sort of pace, really, and I want to leave some time at the end for discussions. But Greta Thunberg is a fantastic example. What I really like about Greta is that nobody gave her the platform, she made the platform. Does that make sense? We spend a lot of time designing systems, you know, and sort of working out how we're going to do our youth participation, and we come up with a program, and you know, we make it very structured and rigid. Reflecting on Greta Thunberg and all that she's achieved as a young person, she created her own platform. She did it in her own way, and I think one of the things I've learned from that is that in our youth participation, we need to give young people that space. So we do need to give young people that opportunity to speak, and not say, right, what we're going to do. Yeah, we as adults have come up with a process of youth participation, and here's what you're all going to do in order to be part of this participatory activity. Actually, that's the wrong way around. We're trying to be too adult, and what we try to do is we try to take very adult models, and then we sort of try and replicate them with young people. So, you know, we take even the names of some of the stuff we come up with, we call them youth councils, and we call them youth forums, and we take very adult titles and very sort of rigid sounding things and say, right, that's how we do youth participation. For me, it's about it's even more basic than that. Our first starting point is actually conversations with young people, and that might sound really basic, and you're thinking, I've come on this webinar and you've just told me to have conversations with young people. That is absolutely critical part of youth participation, is that conversation time. And so if you've got a team of people or volunteers, I think it's really important to look at how we do training with volunteers and other youth workers around listening to young people, and creating that space for young people to have their voices heard is really, really important. So I've recently been reading a piece of academic research which is looking at meaningful conversations, and I thought, oh, this is going to be really very good. It's going to be very revolutionary for my sort of webinars and training. Not to belittle the academics, but when I got into it, it was basically saying, you know, have meaningful conversations with young people, ask them questions, listen for feedback, ask them open questions. But the most important thing about meaningful conversations is creating that space to listen to young people. So actually what the paper I took away from it was saying is actually create conversation with young people that have got, you know, space and meaning behind them, and they're leading somewhere. Okay, so it feels very a basic part of sort of youth participation, but it's absolutely integral really to the whole process. And I'm really pleased that some of you mentioned around creativity. What we tend to do, and because a lot of us have got this funding pressure coming down that we have to involve young people and we have to do that, what we tend to do is go, all right, we'll do it in a very rigid way that the funders like, and it's all very good. What we've got there, we've got a whole sector of people here that work every day with young people and are really creative, are very innovative thinking. But what we tend to do is fall into that trap of just doing what we've always done, and ignoring the fact we've got a very entrepreneurial and a very creative youth sector. Certainly in Norfolk, we definitely have. I've been training in Norfolk now for a few years, and it always surprises me just how switched on organisations are. So I guess what I'm saying today, one of the key takeaways is actually youth participation doesn't have to be boring. It doesn't have to be young people sat around a table with flip chart and pens. It can be young people outside. It can be young people doing a high ropes course, and you're your team are having those conversations with young people. The challenge is capturing that. So if you go down the sort of more informal route, it's around how do we capture those conversations and those key bits of information that young people give us. But at its heart, youth participation, comes down to listening to young people, having meaningful conversations, and being open to what young people might say, because that is the other thing that we sort of say. I get sent surveys. We do a lot of evaluation work for youth work projects, and I get sent surveys, and what it says is, out of 3, how would you rate the service that you receive? Answer 1 is excellent, answer 2 is very good, and answer 3 is good. And I think, oh, well, hang on a minute, what's going on here? And what people say is, oh, well, we don't want to report back to the funders that actually young people aren't very happy. So we've sort of created this structure that makes sure we never create bad news, and we never share that we might have got something wrong, or we might not have included young people properly. So again, just think about how we do youth participation. Don't assume that you just have to accept one of these rigid structures. Think creatively, but also think about authenticity and how we make it a genuine process where we want to hear what young people think, and we're actually willing to take bad news. We're actually willing to hear it. That is part of youth participation, and it's very easy to get into that trap of we don't really want to hear bad news, so let's try and engineer it so we don't have to hear bad news. It's in that bad news and in that learning and in where things go wrong that we learn to do things better. So I'm more fixated in failure and what went wrong and why did it go wrong in terms of fueling learning. And it's the same with youth participation. So yeah, another really interesting fact that I heard recently, in terms of one of the things that you have to be aware of is not bombarding young people with information requests and tell us about this and tell us about that. How many of you as adults have felt overwhelmed by the amount of information that you receive on a daily basis? Yeah, people are nodding. How many people feel that? What's interesting about that, did you know that in our life, in one day now, we process more information than somebody 200 years ago would have processed in a lifetime? Okay, so the average amount of information that somebody consumed 200 years ago in their lifetime could be put into like a copy of the New York Times or the Guardian. Okay, we now consume that amount of data or information on a daily basis. So it's important to think about that. And young people, I think, young people are growing up or their formative years are in this environment of information overload. So I think when we do youth participation, it's about focusing questions and doing it in a way that doesn't bombard young people with too many questions, that we allow some space for young people to speak and to be heard. So good, really good. I'm really pleased. I'm just going to share a couple of very quick slides with you. But before I do that, just one reason that I did put you out into breakout rooms is that, one of the reasons I did that is to give you a sense of what our training is like. So if you come on the July session, it's very much working in groups, discussing it, getting underneath the skin a little bit of youth participation and how to do it. And so we'll go through sort of ways to approach it, principles and things you need to think about as part of that session. So yes, that was why I sort of did the breakout group as well. Just to say, if you put in comments in the chat, I will come to that. I'm not ignoring you. But yeah, I just wanted to make sure we kept the session going. So I'm just going to quickly share a couple of slides I've put together for today. And some of you will be very familiar with some of this, but I always think it's good, even when I come back. Hang on a second, let me get the right screen. Even when I come back to running this training, every time I do it, it's really good to be reminded about some of this stuff. So for one, I think this is a really useful quote. People will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel. Okay, so if you're thinking about, hang on a minute, my slides have got in a muddle. If you're thinking about how do we structure our youth participation, and you're thinking, oh, let's just fit it into a quick 5 minutes, we'll get a whole load of young people in the room, and we'll literally get all the answers out of them in 5 minutes, and then we'll move on to something else, and it'll be really quick. actually in that process, think about this quote: how are we making those young people feel? So are we making them feel like their viewpoint and opinions are valued? And are we creating that space for them to feel included and feel valued in that process? Picking up on some of the comments around the young people with learning difficulties and communication needs and that sort of stuff. Again, a bit of advanced thinking in terms of how do we structure that to make sure that those young people have an opportunity to speak, or we gain their input. And again, creativity lies at the core of how we do that. So yeah, I just think that's very important sort of value or principle of youth participation. So really very quick overview of the objectives this morning. What I'd like to do is sort of refresh everybody's memory to remember the reason that we do youth participation and the reason that we like, the reason why it's so important. I really wanted to sort of refresh people's memory on that. And now if you're thinking, well, I've got booked on this by my manager and I'm not quite sure what youth participation even means. In its most simple form, participation is a process where somebody influences decisions about their lives, and this leads to change. So participation is about, for us in the youth sector, it's about how we listen to young people and include them, but ultimately how that influences change in their own lives. And I always reference this, but some of you might be familiar with it. One of the key reasons that young people that come through the care system and then effectively take that local authority to court for sort of mistreatment or poor service delivery or whatever you want to call it, one of the core reasons that those cases are being successful at the moment is actually young people coming through the care system are saying, at no point was my voice or my influence included in any of the decisions that were made about my care arrangements. And so it's becoming more and more important. So one of the things that in those situations that they're referencing is Article 12 of the United Nations Convention, which effectively states that young people have a right to have their voices heard, and they have a right to be listened to by the organisations that work with them. And I think it's really important to remember that even in the youth sector, because although we're sort of meant to be the flagship leaders of youth participation, I still meet people. Unfortunately, a friend of my wife, we met them at the weekend. He was a youth worker, and he said, before he'd asked me what I did for a living, he said, "Oh, I'm a youth worker." I said, "Oh, that must be quite challenging at the moment, coming out of COVID and all that sort of stuff." And he said, "Oh, it's fine. I just tell the young people what they've got to do, and they either like it or they don't." And then he said, "What do you do?" And I said, "Oh, I do youth participation training." And you could sort of see him wishing he hadn't said that out loud. But again, it's really, it happens in our sector. So I think it's really important that we sort of, we're the flag bearers for youth participation and genuine listening to young people. In the group, some of you mentioned about sort of tokenistic youth participation practice. And I could do an all-day sort of seminar on this, and I'm not going to go there, but just very quickly to introduce you to Arnstein's ladder, which effectively at the bottom you've got your sort of manipulation of effectively non-participation activity is at the very bottom of the ladder, and then you've sort of got the tokenistic elements of it: informing, consultation, placation. So effectively tokenism and telling young people or informing them, this is what we're going to do, this is what we're going to do, what do you think about it? And how often do we do that? Because actually we're pushed for time, or we've just got to get something done, and we end up just informing young people. We don't actually have them actively participate in that process. And then as you start going up the ladder, partnership, which I really like. I like the fact that actually we work in partnership with young people. Okay, so we don't work with young people, we work in partnership with young people. And I think it puts an emphasis around participation and how we're interested to hear from young people. And then as you go further up the ladder, you get sort of delegated power, which is where, young people are 100% in control. And then we reach the sort of top at 8, which is the citizen control bit, which is Greta Thunberg creating her own platform and creating that space to have her voice heard. She wasn't given it by a youth organisation. She wasn't given it by the government. She created a movement, and she took the platform that she sort of created, which is right at the top of the rung. So it's just important to think about, perhaps you're in the process of reviewing your youth participation and how we do it. It's a really useful tool to visit this and look at it and ask yourself some searching questions around, how far into youth participation are we willing to go, and where are we at on this sort of ladder of participation. It's a really important thing to sort of look at. I used to have it on the office wall in my office back in the days when I was working in the youth centre. And again, it's just really useful to be reminded when we're making decisions about services and young people's lives that we consider at what point they are on that ladder. And you'll be pleased to know I haven't got loads of slides, so it isn't a slide heavy webinar today. More some key thoughts and some principles and some things to take away. And I realise we've only got a few minutes left, so I'd really welcome any questions, discussion time, and any thoughts that other people might like to bring. I realise that's been a very quick session. I feel like I've talked very quick to get everything in, but welcome questions. From you all. Go on, Sarah.
Can I ask a question? So we work with young people and they become into young adults, and they then go into other services which become adult social services. And I really, really worry that we encourage young people to have a voice. We encourage them to kind of make sure that they're influencing things, and then they move into another realm, another world, where suddenly their voices don't seem to be heard. I don't hear a lot of participation going on, and that really concerns me. Is that we encourage children to have a voice, and then they become 18 and move into another service, and we're going, well, we actually don't want to hear from you anymore. How can we change that? Because that really, really concerns me. So they lose their voice again.
Yes. And it is a thing. So we do a lot of work with homeless organisations. It's kind of full circle, because what I find when working with homeless adults is actually, if you'd been involved in youth work, you wouldn't be here right now. I'm pretty confident of that. So there are sectors like that where lived experience is becoming more important, which I effectively call lived experience the sort of adult version of youth participation in its simplest terms. But it is a challenge. I guess what we give young people by doing youth participation with them as part of our youth work activity is that confidence and that self-esteem, so that when they do move into adult services, young people are actually empowered to say, well, hold on a minute, you never actually asked me what I thought. And actually what we're doing in youth work is equipping young people for life with those skills to actually have their voices heard. So yes, I think the system does let adults down, and yes, adults aren't listened to, but actually if we can equip young people to with the confidence and the opportunities to learn how to have their voices heard, which is very sort of idealistic reply, I realise, but
but what we need to be doing is influencing those people who work within that service to recognise the value of participation, and I think that's where we're falling through the gaps all the time. Okay.
And we sort of get into the sort of empowerment piece as well. Like I used to work in London with Afro-Caribbean boys, and they were getting stopped by the police really regularly, and all that stop and search sort of stuff, and we did a session with them around how do you what are your rights, how do you deal with that situation without getting, where you maintain your rights, have your voice heard, but you don't actually end up in some sort of detrimental trouble from it. Again, it's a really challenging thing to sort of think about, but it's important that we equip young people with that knowledge. But brilliant question, Sarah, thank you. I think again it comes back to that flag bearing bit. Actually, as a bunch of youth sector organisations, we can challenge adult services around that, and we can model best practice to them as well, which I think is important, which I would love to see. Wouldn't you love to see that adult services go, cool, that youth organisation down the road in Norfolk are doing a really good job with young people, and the service is fantastic, look at all they're achieving. Wouldn't that be brilliant?
Yeah, that would be
a little
great.
way from there yet.
I can retire then.
And I do live in a very idealistic bubble, I appreciate, but we've got a hope for this stuff, haven't we? Brilliant, thank you, Sarah. Any other questions? everyone's very quiet.
Simon, there was a comment in the chat earlier about the different age groups and how participation for a 7-year-old and a 14-year-old and a 19-year-old are going to look very different. I wondered if you could comment on that.
Yeah, definitely. It comes back to that creativity bit. So what we tend to do, we tend to go, right, this is how we're going to do it. Yeah, it's not really going to be very good for the 7-year-olds. 14-year-olds it might be all right with, and we're really going to get the good stuff from the 19-year-olds. And I would challenge that. I think actually you need to think purposefully about, okay, what level of communication have the young people got that we're talking to? So if they're children of 7, yeah, what level of information are we likely to get from that? But also, what activities are we going to do in order to get those young people talking? And again, it comes back to that creativity bit. So simple things, you know, like you've got a group of children. I did this last week in Leicester with a project we were working with primary school children. We did a simple like sort of scoreboard situation where they move from one side of the room to the other, and that sounds very simple and basic, but what we did is a head count and turn that into a percentage result at the end. But what we did from the children's perspective, it was quite good fun, and they were running around the classroom. And the head teacher came in at one point and thought, what on earth is happening in here? But we were having fun while we were doing it. And then as adults, we were converting that into information that we could feed back to funders. And so I think it's about that. It's about thinking purposefully about the age group. So it isn't about designing a one-size-fits-all process. It's about multiple different processes that get the best out of the age group, or different young people with different needs, I guess. Yeah, it's a really good question though, because how do we get effective feedback across age groups? And I think the older teenagers are probably a bit easier, you know, the ones that are sort of much more communicative as well. That's the trouble, because in youth participation we tend to find that the sort of usual suspects, I call them, get really well involved in youth participation, and they pop up all over the place. And my question is always, where are the young people where are the young people that are disadvantaged that we're missing in this process, and where are their voices? So yeah, we do need to think with purposefulness around youth participation and how to do it effectively. But yeah, good question, Amy. I'm just going through the chat to make sure I've got any others.
Could I ask a question?
You certainly can, Charlotte, go on.
Yeah, so I'm hopefully going to be working with Momentum soon, and I've worked with children in the past, but this will sort of be my first sort of big role working within sort of youth and youth participation, and I'd love to know if you've got any advice or sort of tips when sort of coming into this work, and sort of if there's any sort of traps to be aware of, or, you know, not to fall into.
Yeah, I think one of the things, and I think people in the room will probably be used to this also, is that you tend to find when people find out you've got direct contact with young people, they come out of the woodwork and they come up with all this stuff they've got to consult young people in, and they're quite and can be quite forceful around it. I've been there. I had a planning officer once say to me, "Oh, we need to consult young people about the master plan for this town." And my first thought is like, I'm quite bored by that. What are young people going to think? But they were very forceful about needing to do it, and they were very clear about how they wanted to do it. You know, this is what we need, this is how we're going to do it. And I actually had to stop them and say, no, if you want genuine feedback from young people, or, you know, for them to have a genuine voice, this is how we're going to do it. And sometimes you have to be a little bit, we almost have to safeguard young people to make sure that we don't put them into a participation process that is flawed or not going to deliver let them have a realistic voice. So I think the key thing is holding those principles of participation and genuine participation is a really key thing. And in that instance, I took the planning officers came out to our Friday night youth outreach project and stood there in the cold and the rain. And suddenly they had a lot more respect for youth workers. But equally, they got more realistic feedback from young people, because young people were pitching up at the project and going, what are the two guys in suits doing over there then? And then you sort of say, well, come over and have a chat with them. They're planning officers. What on earth's a planning officer? And you know, but it was putting the brakes on stuff to say, actually, you know, we work with young people every day. We're the specialists or the experts in this space. So here's how I think we need to do it. Yeah, and it's challenging at points, but I think that would be my one of my tips is around actually, question that, and why are we doing this? What are we hoping to achieve? And is there any change at the end of it? There's nothing worse than doing youth consultation with young people. They know you can't make any change. We know we can't make any change. And that's very frustrating as well. So I think just, a couple of tips there. And Emma, you were waving at me there. So
I was just going to say about learning from other groups that are out there. So things like girl guiding. There's a wealth of, I know that's girls only, and you've got Scouts and Cubs and all other youth organisations. It'd be worth just going, maybe Charlotte, visiting some of these groups and seeing how they currently interact and how they let the young people set the boundaries, and how engaged they look in certain activities that they're working on. So we did one recently where we split them into their groups and said, right, we want you to write down the words that you would really like your friends to have, the sort of characteristics you'd like your friends to have all the time, sometimes, or never. And then they had to put them in different hoops so that they could see what we wanted our friends to be like. And you could do that with a service. If you what would you like your service to always be like? What would you like your service sometimes to be like? Or what would your service, you'd like it never to be like? And get them to sit and talk about, is this something that you want to talk about? Or, get your planning officer in to say, what sort of I don't know, what sort of facilities would you like? Do you want lots of shops, or do you want, what does it look like? What does your ideal town look like? And get the really off the wall conversations going, and get people to just talk, and you will get some real nuggets from just hearing them talk. I mean, they wanted sometimes, for example, the Brownies sometimes wanted their friends to be crazy. And yet you would think that the word crazy has lots of different connotations for different age groups. So it's about getting an understanding of what they mean by certain words as well, because their ideas of certain words are very different to older people's terms for words.
Asking open questions and getting young people. What does that actually mean? What are you thinking, or what does that mean to you as a young person? Does that mean something? That means something different to us as adults, because recognizing that age gap or differences,
and getting them to set the boundaries as well of what they want to talk about. They might only want to talk about planning for 5 minutes. They might want to spend the rest of the session doing something else. But if you can work together with them, you'll get so much more from it.
And I think 5 minutes is okay. That's the other thing. We go youth participation, that needs to be an hour-long session. No, that can be a 5-minute chat around the coffee bar with some young people, very much on young people's terms, and I think that's one of my sort of top tips, is actually when we do youth participation and how we do it, it's got to be on young people's terms. And the mistake we make often is we do it on adult terms, and we expect young people to come to us on that, or to come to our level on that, and that's not the way around it should be. I'm really conscious of the time. It's been a real whistle stop tour of youth participation this morning. Amber's made some really valid points in the chat, which I think I'd like to end on, although she's gone. If someone could report to Amber that I did respond. She's sort of raised a very important point about representation. Actually, we need to hear from all young people. It's not just, it's very easy to go for those that are the usual suspects that are very free and confident and open to chatting. We do need to go out of our way as youth sector professionals and volunteers to actually make sure that we involve all young people, even those difficult ones that have more challenging behaviour and all of that stuff. Actually, that's far more important that we get their viewpoint as well. So brilliant. If somebody could pass on to Amber, it's a brilliant point. That would be great. And then, lastly, just to say thank you very much for a lovely morning, and join us on the 13th of July. If you get to the 13th of July's booking page, which we'll email out the link for, and it says full, please can you email Amy or one of the team at Momentum, and we'll organise a second session if need be. But apart from that, thank you all for coming this morning. It's been really good to see you all.